Hey, Art Angle listeners, we're excited to share the Roundup is going to be live at this year's Independent 20th Century Art Fair. Join Ben, myself, and a special guest in New York on Saturday, September 6th at 5 p.m. for a special recording. Come be a part of the audience and hear and contribute to the conversation as it happens. All the ticket details are in the show notes. We can't wait to see you there.
Hi everyone, Ben here. It's the end of summer and we are deep into preparing for what promises to be a very busy fall, so we are taking this week off. In the meantime, this is a re-air of my interview with the artist Miriam Simun about her art workshop that guides participants into understanding what it means to think like an octopus. As I think you'll hear from listening, it's an episode I personally really got into, and it's been a favorite of listeners. I hear that in the last weeks of her show, Simun was swamped with new recruits for her octopus army.
But if you can get a little bit beyond that or out of that, I have found, and other people have told me, that you access some other way of being in the world that I think is the reward for pushing through.
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. Have you ever asked yourself, what do artists have to learn from the octopus? Maybe not. But the question is at the heart of the work of Miriam Simun, who currently has an exhibition about her Institute for Transhumanist Cephalopod Evolution at the art space Recess in Brooklyn. And it turns out the answer to the question is mind-expanding, almost literally so. Simun's unusual art practice can be seen as part of a serious trend in recent years of artists exploring non-human thought of all kinds in hopes of shifting our troubled relationship to the natural world. For her show at Recess, the centerpiece is actually a series of workshops titled How to Become an Octopus and Sometimes Squid. For these, Simun guides participants through a 2-hour program of psychophysical exercises she has developed over many years through collaborations with marine biologists, engineers, dancers, and synchronized swimmers. She's taught the method all over the world, and the description says the classes are open to anyone curious about cephalopods, new ways of sensing, and expanding the definition of self, which included me. I got in there to explore my cephalopod side, and we are going to talk about Simun's art and what I got out of my experience in her workshop as well. Miriam Simun, thank you for talking to me about this body of work.
Thank you so much. Super fun to be here.
So before we start, the most important question, the plural of octopus is what?
Octopuses.
Right. Okay. So very important, something I know everyone at home was going to be asking. And now you've gotten one thing from this podcast, one practical thing. And now we're on to the far out stuff. So just to start, this artwork is about thinking like an octopus. What does it mean to think like an octopus?
The first thing I'll say that I find really interesting is I think in octopuses, thinking and feeling get a little bit more entangled than we like to think about the way we think. Although, of course, our emotions and our thoughts are super entangled, whether or not we always kind of admit that or work with that. But octopuses are amazing in that they really break the Cartesian divide. So this idea of mind and body just biologically doesn't work because they have neurons spread throughout the entire body. It's really hard to say, okay, this right here is body and this is brain. The other thing about them is that the neurons are in each arm and there's kind of a concentration of ganglia in each arm. And this means that the arms can make independent decisions of each other and of the main brain. So it's kind of this multi-thinking, multi-armed creature.
Yeah, it's fascinating. In the video in this show, I think there's a quote that says that an octopus is sort of like 8 giant, independent, almost thinking for themselves tongues in one body, which is a very different way of thinking about what it means to be in the world. Is that sort of what interests you?
Definitely. So the octopus, it's covered in suckers and they're chemotactile receptors, which means that they can experience touch in the way we experience touch, kind of mechanically, but also chemically. So the way we experience maybe scent or taste. So imagine now what it's like to have these 8 kind of independently deciding, feeling, tasting arms moving around and encountering the world.
Yeah, and the other thing, something I took away from the workshop, you said those suckers are some of the softest material in the world, meaning that they're really intimate with their environment. And then because of this sort of multi-brained or consciousness that they have, another thing you wrote somewhere, you said, uncontrolled movements by an object around you are usually a sign for a human that it is not a part of you. If you were an octopus, these distinctions would be blurred. So there's something in here, something that fascinates you about this other way of relating to the environment, a consciousness that's more in tune with its environment. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And those words come from Peter Godfrey Smith from the Other Minds book. But consider what that means if different body parts of yours are making decisions that you might not be fully aware of. So then is that you or is that not you, right? And then when you encounter the world, maybe you also have a bit of a more blurry understanding of you, not you. And I mean, we are all entangled beings through breath, through water, through electricity also. And this is just like a biological instantiation of that that's much more intense. I'm really interested in considering this kind of way of thinking, being, encountering. How do we notice how much the world affects us and we affect the world?
Octopuses are really having a cultural moment. It's been a big year for the octopus. And I was at the opening of your show at Recess, and you had an octopus scientist there, and the audience was just so engaged. They had so many questions about this fascinating creature. I know you were telling me just now that you had a workshop and 40 people came to this How to Think Like a Cephalopod workshop. When did you first become interested in octopuses and why?
Not just how to think, but how to become.
Right. Very important.
I mean, I had a kind of funny sideways introduction into these totally incredible animals. The fossil record is twice as old as the dinosaurs. They've survived for hundreds of millions of years. They have these kind of crazy cognitive and tactile and shape-shifting capacities. But the way I first started thinking about the octopus and the cephalopod, which is the class of animals that also include cuttlefish and squid, is when I was asked by Hiromi Ozaki to join the Media Lab at MIT. She asked what do I want to work on, and I said, I want to think about how to evolve the human to encounter sea level rise.
And this grows out of an interest of you as an artist. You have many works as an artist that have often dealt with climate change and thinking about getting people interested in thinking about climate change in new ways.
My first interest was just in the future. And so I come more from technology studies in a way, but at some point along the way, even if you're thinking about the future in terms of technology, like we can't avoid that the climate is in total crisis and it's going to be really different. So I'm quite interested in actually how like innovation and climate change braid together.
Right. Sorry, but I got you off track from the Media Studies Lab. So you go to the Media Studies Lab to think about climate change, and then where does the octopus enter the picture?
Yeah, so I wanted to think about like how do we, instead of adapting our environment to fit our needs, how do we adapt ourselves to fit a changing environment? And then I was just there and everybody was asking me, what are you working on? And I told them I'm interested in figuring out how people can live in and under the water in better ways. And I just kept having this response of, oh, so you want to become a mermaid? And
so a very dismissive response from the engineers.
Yes, exactly. And maybe after the 14th time somebody asked me if I wanted to be a mermaid, I got kind of annoyed and decided to go watch The Little Mermaid just because I was fascinated, like, why is this the only cultural imaginary available to thinking about how to live in and with the water? So I watched The Little Mermaid, which I watched as a kid but didn't really remember, and was kind of shocked to understand that The Little Mermaid is not a very exciting character, I would say. And the really exciting, powerful character is Ursula, which is half human, half octopus, or Cecilia. And actually, the Little Mermaid sells her voice and her fins for the prince. But who makes the trade and who has the power to make all this happen? It's Ursula. the sea witch, right? So I got really interested in Caecilias first, like in this mythology of this other way of being in the water.
Sorry, what? The Caecilias? What is that?
Caecilia is a mythological creature that's half human, half octopus. No, something similar that you have the half human, half horse.
New data to me. Okay.
And from the Caecilias, I started thinking about the cephalopods, and then I just understood that they're these incredible creatures, and the work evolved from there. But the way I got there, is in this kind of sideways way of Ursula and her charm.
Right. So Ariel is going from the sea to the land, and you're more interested in going from the land to the sea, learning how to think like an aquatic being. And then how does that become this now many-year practice of expanding the thought of working with scientists and all kinds of other professionals, dancers, free divers about what we can learn from octopus?
So I have to be honest. At first, I was in this amazing technical institution. And at first I was kind of thinking about, okay, how can we change our genome to live underwater better? How can we adopt prosthetics? These kind of things. And a couple things happened. First, I was kind of collecting all of the possible genomes from underwater creatures that we might want to speculatively insert into ourselves. And at some point I felt like I was compiling a shopping catalog. And it just felt a bit extractive and weird to me. And so I started thinking about, okay, maybe I want to work with one animal in its whole systemically to think about how we evolve. And then the other thing that happened is I decided to go learn how to free dive, which is this contemporary sport of diving very deep and very long underwater.
Like this is the real origin story in a way.
Maybe that's true. So I went to go learn how to free dive. When I got there, I could hold my breath for 20 seconds. I'm a bit claustrophobic. I was a smoker at that point. I would never have made myself do this if it wasn't for an artwork. But after a 2-hour training of learning all these different breathing techniques, I was able to hold my breath for 2.5 minutes. And it totally blew my mind, right? That I have this capacity within my body to hold my breath. Breathing was something I'm doing all day, all night that I wasn't aware of. And it just raised this question of what else can I do with my body as it already is that I don't know about, which kind of raised the question in terms of thinking about innovation and technological progress and being at a place like the Media Lab was this question of how do we know what we need to add on to our bodies if we don't fully know what we can do with what we already have.
Right. So can I ask you, is this a science project for you or an art project? Is there a meaningful distinction between those things for you? Is it more about a metaphor, like what we can do with the metaphor of the octopus, or is it really more like how can we think like the octopus? What do we do with that scientific data?
I don't ever think about it as a science work. I do think about it as a way to make knowledge. It definitely started as an artwork and weirdly became a life practice for me along the way, which I was not expecting and am continued to be surprised by. When I say how to become an octopus or how to become a cephalopod, well, I'm interested in all the different ways of becoming, right? So there are formal ways, there are like functional ways, there are cognitive ways. I'm also interested in what kind of human we become when we try and probably fail to fully become a cephalopod. You could think about it as a science experiment from the perspective of neuroscience, just in terms of the neurons that you use are the ones that build connections. And so the more you practice the kind of practices that we train in the How to Become a Cephalopod workshop, perhaps the more you develop those kinds of abilities.
There is a whole category of art right now that's really about changing your way of thinking. Like the actual art happens inside your brain instead of like specific objects. And there are specific objects. There's a video in this particular show at Recess. You've done all kinds of things. Then there's this workshop, which in some ways functions like performance art, but really the product is what's going on inside your head and the head of people there. Like changing the way one thinks is the artistic output here. And I think that's kind of an interesting genre of art that's a little bit different than performance art, say. And the other thing, just to say, I think there's an interesting metaphorical thing where in order to develop this method, which we'll talk about in just one second, you've worked with a broad range of people from different fields. Maybe you can talk about that. I do think it's interesting that one of the things you want people to take away from the octopus is this idea of multiple intelligence, like different agents working together in one unit. And then the art practice itself is like bringing together these different fields into this one new container, which is this new octopus form of thinking.
Super happy to answer that question. But first, just because you mentioned it, I'm so curious for you what happened during the practice.
I think probably best to describe the practice. If you go to recess right now, you will see a video playing a screen, but really the center of the show, as far as I'm concerned, is a sort of blue, fuzzy grotto that you've created. And that's really the stage or the place where you have these workshops. You have the option to change into a leotard. I did not, I both not sure it fit me, and I don't know if I was there yet. And then you lead us through a series of exercises. I start with breathing exercises and move up to things that start with sort of coming to an understanding or describing the evolutionary origins of octopus consciousness and how they feel and experience the world. It involves you blindly feeling about your environment with other people. And then you escalate through those series of exercises to different contacts with other people, mirroring other people, forming a kind of collective entity together. It's hard for me to describe. How do you think about it?
I love this description. Thank you.
Well, I'm doing my best. It's another way of thinking.
Yeah, I really do think about it as a training, right? A training or a practice, something that the more you do it, the more kind of deeper you can fall into it, and also the more accessible it becomes to you in your kind of normal everyday life. It borrows from freediving, breathing training. It thinks about the evolutionary ancestry that's inside of our DNA and kind of accessing that memory. It's working a lot with touch. It's working a lot with trying to distribute our intelligence or our decision-making. So informing this collective with other people, finding moments and the openness to where you're not sure if the decision is coming from you or from the other person, or perhaps from this kind of third intelligence that emerges, which people experience in other ways. But I think movement is a fun way and the most natural way for me to access that. So that's the route I took. But I'm so curious because you said this idea of the art is happening inside the head. I would hope that it's not only inside the head, but also inside the body, or like blurring a little bit this, because one of the things we do practice is like trying to let our foot decide, for example, in how we move, as opposed to always only thinking from the brain and kind of directing the rest of the body. But I'm so curious. So for you, if you experience the art as what's happening inside your head, like what happened inside your head?
Oh, Miriam, I am a very self-conscious person, and I think a lot of people are. I mean, I think this is sort of the contemporary condition for a lot of people. And maybe that's why there's so much interest in your workshop. I mean, I think I already mentioned that you were saying that 40 people there for the last workshop you did, which I can't even imagine in that space, 40 people. The mass of tentacles that would be. What I was able to get out of the workshop is by the end of the 2 hours, I was just about able to see the edges of my self-consciousness, to kind of like step out into a slightly different way of thinking, to see how you're kind of setting borders around yourself, a relationship to your environment and other people. I don't know if I would be able to totally escape that, but I think I got a deeper awareness of it.
Well, you only gave me 2 hours, so come back for more.
Well, I mean, the octopus is like a liquid creature. I mean, you talk a lot about the softness of the octopus as well as its multiplicity. And yeah, I've been thinking about it ever since, and I don't want this to be too much about my own thoughts, but when you talk about the Cartesian duality, the mind-body duality, and think about yourself as kind of in a box looking out at the world around you, I did end up thinking a lot about how that's related to how we have hard bodies. We're vertebrates with a central nervous system as opposed to an octopus, which is a soft-bodied thing with a much more distributed intelligence, and sort of connecting those two things and thinking about how much of my consciousness is taken up by thinking about myself looking out on other things as an object to pitch myself against. So it's something I got out of the workshop. Yeah, for sure. But I have to say, I was pretty embarrassed the whole time. I mean, it's very difficult to get out of your own head.
Well, thank you for sticking with it. I do ask people to move in different ways and relate in different ways, and it can feel weird and it can call up self-consciousness. But if you can get a little bit beyond that or out of that, I have found, and other people have told me, that you access some other way of being in the world that I think is the reward for pushing through. But what I'm really interested in what you were saying, that the self with the hard boundaries of the skin, of course, the skin is porous. And then you have like nose and mouth and things coming in and out all kinds of ways. But also just thinking about like how we come together in groups, how much the energy, personality, psychology of the people we're encountering actually does affect the way we think, present, operate, function, right? We are fundamentally social creatures. I think we're more and more expected to kind of define ourselves in a singular way and be consistent, almost like a brand. And I'm really interested in fact how we have so many different parts to ourselves and can function in so many different ways. So part of what I want to do in the training and what I try to do is open up the space for people to experiment a little bit and understand that who you are is also totally dependent to who else is in the room and how they are.
How do people react normally? I mean, we're talking about this a little after the workshop I went to, and I just really wonder, I think in a certain sense, in general, the average person you encounter in New York City is very inside their head. You've done this with all kinds of people I know all around the world. Do people freak out? What kind of feelings come up for people when they're going through this kind of training?
Some people freak out. I try to be very gentle and go slow. And I've had some feedback from people that they were surprised at how far they went because they didn't think that it was possible. That is why I like to go slow. But I've had all kinds of responses. Somebody last night said that they had a profound moment with playing with a suggestion I gave at some point of, for example, noticing your impulse and just trying out doing the opposite. So it's just little switches of attempting to be in another way, to shapeshift in another way, right? Like shapeshifting is one of the amazing capacities that cephalopods have, or opening to all the ways that we communicate, that it's not through words. Things like that continue to come up for people as moments where something really clicked for them. But for sure, for some people, it can be difficult work because just generally dropping into your body, sometimes you become aware of things that are bothering you that you've been ignoring for a long time, emotions and things. And of course, like coming into contact with other people, with strangers, can be difficult. And I like to say that in the octopus arms, there's always that one arm that doesn't want to play and is hiding in the corner of the tank, and that is also an important part of the organism. So I try to always underscore that is a totally valid role to play, but also just important to notice what role you occupy and if it's possible to occupy another one.
I sort of noticed about myself is like basically my impulse is to reach the edges of just where I'm touching up against another consciousness and just basically mark my own boundaries of my own space. By the end, you're in kind of a map. I mean, that's the whole point, is to kind of access a sort of distributed intelligence where you're functioning with other people as a conglomeration. But that's pretty intimate, and people are sensitive about that. And, you know, for an octopus, they just don't have the human sexuality or sensuality. How do you relate to all that? There are obviously all these kind of weird things that bubble up. When you do these things, how do you alert people about those kind of sensitivities?
So 3 things come up in what you just asked. First is kind of the practical answer, that I start with some kind of grounding and consent and attitude and energy that you're bringing to the practice, and also that you have the option always to withdraw and things like that. The other 2 things that come up is I'm really, really interested in the huge space of sensuality that we have before we get to sexuality, right? And I think in different cultures, sometimes sensuality immediately means sexuality. But in fact, there's a lot of sensual pleasure that we can access that is not sexual. And I think also accessing that sensual pleasure with the world around us is what helps us connect to the world that we're living in. And I'm really interested in helping people and myself explore that, find that, enjoy that, and that touch doesn't have to be sexual. And the third thing I'll say is this thing about, I don't remember exactly what you called it, but this mass that you become, or this conglomeration of bodies and people, I'll again say that we're always in that, even if you're at a distance. So it might not be as confronting or as obvious because you're at a distance, or because you have words to kind of explain away or mediate what's happening between two different bodies, but it's always there. And what I hope that through the training we can get to is, one, a noticing of what's happening, and two, the ability to begin to play with that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and there's a certain productive discomfort about the whole thing. I guess the way I took it is using the octopus as a kind of a metaphor to get to that place where you see that kind of distributed social intelligence that you have with other people. And on that level, I think it was very successful for me. There is a moment, and I think it has to do with the environmental questions that are very much on people's minds, that has led a lot of artists to explore this question of escaping the human. Like, there's a lot of artwork right now about getting out of a human mentality and getting into plant mentality or different forms of animal consciousness. There's also this other kind of post-humanism in the air, which is more about cybernetics and technology. How do you relate to those lineages, and what do you think about this idea of escaping the human that's very much in the air right now?
Yeah.
Water, I guess, in your case.
Those thinkers are important to me, like Haraway, Latour. Sridhar Nemanis writes about how we are bodies of water, and that thinking definitely shows up in my work. The show at Recess is called the Institute for Transhumanist Cephalopod Evolution, and a lot of people, especially the post-humanists, hate that I use the word transhumanist, but I'm actually really interested in that word and in reclaiming that word from the singularis, because originally it just means a transcendence of our current human psychological, intellectual, physical, spiritual abilities into something greater. And I'm really interested in actually reclaiming that word and playing with that word. I would also say that transhumanism, as opposed to posthumanism, for me, kind of proposes like a practical or action-oriented thing to do in order to transcend. And that's very much what I'm doing. But this human thing, I'll just say again, like, I am interested in what kind of human you become in trying and failing to become a cephalopod. I'm also kind of with Fred Moten, who recently said maybe it's time to discard with the category of human altogether. It hasn't been serving us very well.
What does that mean for you? Because obviously there are different ways to do that. Like, there is this whole idea of uploading ourselves into artificial intelligence that sounded science fiction a few years ago. Now it's something people take very earnestly. I feel like your reference to the octopus is a little bit in tension with that, or is trying to wrench us in the other direction, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think octopus intelligence is fundamentally a really embodied intelligence. And this uploading the brain to the internet and kind of getting rid of the body entirely is coming from the idea that the body is not important to thinking, that all of the thinking happens in the brain. And I mean, that's just, well, not true. And also maybe the kind of hyper-rational thinking that is disembodied is less interesting to me, and I would less like to live in that world. Again, coming back to sensual pleasures that don't have to necessarily be sexual. There's a lot of them.
I got a lot out of the workshop. I've been a little critical of this strain of art, or this theme in art, of trying to discard human rationality or human intelligence, look to the trees, look to the beasts. I view it as a kind of despair in the face of the big problems of that humans have made. People are like, let's get rid of the human part of ourselves. And I'm just always kind of like, well, you created it. We're going to have to like solve the problem. You know, our intelligence created this. We need our intelligence to get out of it. And I feel like an octopus can't solve climate change because they just don't have that kind of civilization. You know, it's our civilization that created it. So how do you think of this? Is it an activist project? Is it survival prep? You know, you talked about how you started out by thinking about literally adaptation to sea level rise and stuff like that. Is it more of like a poetic prompt? Or has it become something else in the process of 8 years of thinking about octopuses?
we have the knowledge, science, technology that we need to solve climate change, right? But we don't have the, political will. And different people attribute that to different forces. My proposal is that this practice is a kind of skill building or maybe an intelligence building. And that is an intelligence of relationality, right? Of you with yourself, of you with the world, of you with other people, other creatures, and with the perhaps poetic or not poetic prompt that it's relational intelligence that's going to help us survive. Whether or not we get out of climate change, I don't know, or even in the climate crisis, that it's skills and intelligences of relationality that are going to help you survive.
There's a real playfulness, this kind of art practice that you've created that I really like, a real inventiveness, but you also take it really seriously, and I like that too. How do you think about that balance? How do you keep it from seeming like a novelty?
Play is the most serious thing we have.
Yeah, well, and one sentence, I feel like that's a great answer. If you could rewire one thing about how humans think, what would it be?
This is hard because I also love it sometimes, but our tendency to turn everything into stories and our tendency to really believe our own stories and not leave too much doubt for whether or not they're just like constructions. Our brain is trying to map and pattern match of what's happening in the world and a loosening of that intense story-making ability.
That's so interesting because last night I watched, in preparation for this, the documentary My Octopus Teacher, and then I watched your video, Your Urge to Breathe is a Lie, back to back. I know you're a little bit critical of My Octopus Teacher, and it's interesting to compare that movie, which is this, I don't know what to call it, romantic narrative about this man's relationship with an octopus, to your video, which is an art video, so of course it's different, but also the way I read it is sort of non-narrative in a way. It really is, if you just watch it as a video, is trying to give people the pieces of this way of thought that you're trying to construct, but almost in a way that puts you into a different way of thinking. That's, if it's a narrative that's put together in a different kind of a way. Am I connecting with something there?
Maybe. I haven't really thought about it like that, but I guess instead of a narrative vehicle, I like to think about Your Urge to Breathe is a Lie as a kind of sensual hypnosis as the thing that's moving the work along, or the thing that's moving the viewer through the work.
So very similar to the workshop. Like the video is
an attempt to get you
this world,
to get you into this other state of being, perceiving, feeling. My Octopus Teacher, there's some really beautiful footage, but in the end, it's a story about this guy and his relationship with his son. And like, what is the octopus? I'm sorry, doesn't care about his relationship to his son. So I don't know that you're so reverent to your teacher. But right, it's this need to like put a neat little story that is very relatable over this quite incredible footage and experience with this creature. And like, stories are cool. I'm not against stories, but sometimes it definitely serves me to let go a little bit of all the different stories I carry around with me about myself and about whatever I'm encountering, and try to drop into my senses and like really feel into what I'm encountering.
Seeing without naming. That's a section of the workshop that I got something out of, this idea of trying to experience the world without your categories.
Seeing without naming is this amazing practice by Luciana Achugar, who I worked with in developing the kind of skeleton of psychophysical exercises that make up the cephalopod training. So seeing without naming, the way she talks about it is an attempt to kind of soften the naming brain, the categorizing that happens when we immediately see something and categorize it, and maybe its functionality. So this is a chair, this is a table, this is a microphone, this is a person I like, this is a person I don't like, and instead try to put that on pause for a second and instead notice the color, notice the texture, notice the temperature, notice the physical quality of what you're seeing. And it's actually really interesting. So Leah Kelly, who is a neuroscientist that I'm working with as part of the Recess residency to kind of evolve the practice further, writes about how when we see something textural, the part of our brain that is associated with touching lights up, and vice versa as well, right? So in some ways, we're kind of feeling when we're seeing, and we're seeing when we're feeling. And so what I imagine that practice can do is practice that neural connection and heighten the synesthesia in a way that is kind of already present in all of our brains.
So, Miriam, let's say someone listens to this and they are totally on board. They want to hop on the Octopus train. Aside from joining one of your workshops, what's one small experiment that someone could do to begin their octopus journey, I guess?
I love this question. Thank you. So I think if you're alone and you want to try out being an octopus, it can be nice to just close your eyes, pretend you are not aware of what's around you, and just try to discover where you are through touch, where you are, what things are, how they feel, how they make you feel. And kind of, again, maybe not naming, like trying to figure out, oh, this is the table and this is the wall, but rather just really sensing as if you had suckers that are made of the softest biological material that we know about that can get so close to things and maybe even taste them. So like really just experiencing the sensation of how you can learn where you are through touch. And then if you have someone else that you want to try practice being an octopus with, one of my favorite fun exercises to do is tongue mirroring. So there's a kind of common practice that if you've done a dance or an acting class, you might have done before called hand mirroring, where you kind of hold up your palms of your hands against each other and one person's moving and the other person's following, and you continue to do that until you're not sure who's leading and who's following. So this is the same principle, but instead we're going to practice with the only invertebrate part of our body, which is our tongue. So you literally stick your tongue out of your mouth, and so does the other person, and you mirror each other in movement until you lose track of who's leading and who's following.
Okay, well, if you're out there and you try that, write us, let us know how it goes. Miriam Simun, thank you so much for talking with me about this art show, this artistic journey. It's very thought-provoking.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks for coming and thanks for playing.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you've heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It helps other listeners discover The Art Angle, and we really do appreciate it. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili, with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Caroline Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.